you didn't lose your motivation. Not in the way most people think. You see, when you awaken, truly awaken, something far deeper begins to unravel within you. It's not about laziness or lack of discipline. It's not because you're not trying hard enough. The truth is more mysterious, more sacred, and far more difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't walked through the same fire. This fire doesn't look like passion at first. It looks like collapse. I've walked with seekers, sages, and silent warriors for over 2 decades. Those who have stepped beyond the veil and seen the world for what it truly is. Not just the external chaos or societal masks, but the intricate illusions within their own minds. And the moment of awakening, that first spiritual lightning strike, can feel like everything you've ever wanted. The clarity, the stillness, the sense that you've finally arrived. But then it happens, slowly, quietly, almost like fog rolling in through an open window. You begin to feel hollow. The drive that once propelled you forward now feels irrelevant. The goals you fought for, they no longer light you up. The urgency to become someone, to prove something, evaporates. And what's left behind isn't depression in the medical sense. It's something older, ancient. Something the mystics once called the desert of the soul. Carl Jung understood this in a way few modern minds do. He didn't use trendy phrases or spiritual jargon. But his insight was cutting and timeless. He spoke of the unconscious becoming conscious, of individuation, and of the psychic death that precedes rebirth. He warned us enlightenment doesn't come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. What does that mean? It means awakening is not the end goal. It's the threshold. The door creaks open, and for a brief moment, light pours in. But the next step, the one no one warns you about, it's a collapse of everything that came before. Because your former self, the identity stitched together by childhood wounds, societal expectations, and egoic ambitions, no longer fits. And without that familiar mask, who are you? In this chapter of the soul's journey, the spark doesn't vanish, it hides. It waits in silence, and it challenges you to find a different kind of fire. One not born from hustle or validation, but from essence, from alignment, from deep truth. Let me share with you something I've seen in dozens, perhaps hundreds, of spiritual seekers across cultures, from Sufi mystics in Istanbul to reclusive Zen monks in the mountains of Kyoto. After their moment of awakening, there was always a pause, a silence, a strange emotional paralysis where they no longer knew how to move forward. One of them, a healer in Oaxaca, told me after his awakening, he sat for nearly a year with no idea what to do next. He said it felt as if life had gone mute. Not in a hopeless way, but as though the music he once danced to had stopped playing. That silence, that's the void. The sacred pause Jung so wisely named. But our world doesn't understand pauses. We live in a culture that glorifies movement, achievement, clarity, and goals. So when you stop feeling motivated, when your to-do list no longer makes sense, people around you panic. They call it a crisis. They ask, "What's wrong with you?" But nothing is wrong. In fact, something deeply right is unfolding. You've outgrown the map that once guided your steps. Your ego, which once served as the engine of your ambition, has been dethroned. It's still there, confused, wandering, disoriented, but it no longer has control. And without that ego to push you, without those external carrots dangling in front of you, Your energy system recalibrates. Your motivation system begins to dissolve. Not because you're failing, but because you're becoming. Jung saw this. He called it enantiodromia, the swinging of the psychic pendulum from one extreme to another. From ego-driven striving to soul-level stillness. It is the law of opposites, the cosmic dance of death and rebirth. And right now, if you're feeling lost, foggy, or empty, it means you're in the center of the swing. And let me tell you something few dare to say aloud. This is not the worst place to be. This is sacred ground. Here, in this in-between, your soul is speaking in whispers, not yet in words or visions, but in subtle shifts, a craving for silence, a resistance to inauthenticity, a quiet detachment from the noise. It's not because you've given up. It's because your being is seeking something more real, more eternal. There is a parable I often return to, one that captures this space beautifully. The story of the phoenix. You've heard it before, but hear it again with new ears. The phoenix doesn't just burst into flame one day and rise anew. Before the fire, there is silence. The bird grows weary, its feathers brittle, its songs quiet. It climbs to the top of a sacred mountain and sits, waiting. Not in despair, but in surrender. It knows the old must burn for the new to be born. But it does not rush the flame. It waits for the soul's timing. You, too, are on that mountain. And perhaps that's why your old routines feel hollow. Why you look around and wonder why everyone else seems to be moving. Chasing, building while you are sitting still. But stillness is not stagnation. Stillness is a womb, a place where the old dissolves and the new begins to stir, cell by cell, in the dark. In my research across spiritual traditions, from early Christian mystics to Tibetan Buddhists, I've seen this stage referred to by many names: the cloud of unknowing, the midnight of the soul, the hermit's walk. And they all point to the same truth: the loss of motivation is not regression. It's metamorphosis. You are not lazy. You are molting. And though the process is not glamorous, though it won't land you a viral quote or a best-selling course, it is one of the most vital parts of awakening. Because it strips you bare. It reveals what was false. And it prepares you to be filled with something more enduring than temporary fire soul light. So if you're here, if you're listening, if you've been wondering why nothing makes sense anymore, know this: you're not broken. You are simply in the cocoon. The old flame didn't die. It collapsed to make room for a deeper, steadier one. One that won't flicker in the winds of approval or performance. One that cannot be extinguished by external storms. One that burns from within, fed not by fear, but by knowing. And as you sit in this sacred pause, remember, the silence is not empty. It is full of answers, waiting for you to quiet the old questions long enough to hear them. Stay here. Trust it. Let the old flame collapse. The new one is already being born, and it will light a path you've never walked before. But first, it must rise from the ashes, not with force, but with truth. There is a strange and sacred place that few ever talk about, and even fewer are willing to linger in. It's the space between the collapse of the old self and the birth of the new. A place where the lights go dim, the maps dissolve, and the echoes of your former identity still whisper, trying to convince you to come back. But you can't go back. You already saw through the illusion. You can't unsee truth. This is the forgotten space between. It is not glamorous. It won't give you spiritual fireworks or Instagrammable quotes. It won't make you feel enlightened. If anything, it may make you feel like you're falling apart. And yet, This space is one of the most powerful phases of the spiritual journey. Carl Jung understood this. He knew that transformation didn't happen in the light, it happened in the twilight, in the murk, in the places where you're not quite who you used to be, but not yet who you're becoming. That tension, that in-between state, is where the real alchemy begins. People think spiritual awakening is like climbing a mountain and standing triumphantly at the top, arms raised, eyes shining with purpose. But more often, it's like sinking into the earth, like being buried so something deeper can be born. When the ego begins to loosen its grip, when the persona, the social mask you've worn for decades, starts to fall away. What's left? Silence. And silence can be terrifying, because we've been trained to equate silence with emptiness, and emptiness with failure. But in truth, this silence is a fertile void, a place where the seeds of soul get planted, deep below the surface, where no one can see them, not even you. I once spoke with a woman who had spent years as a high-powered executive. She had the title, the corner office, the wardrobe, and the calendar booked out months in advance. But after her awakening, she couldn't go back. One day she told me, "I can't explain it. I don't want to climb the ladder anymore. But I don't know what I want either. I just feel." In between. In between. That phrase stuck with me. Because it is in this in-between where the ego panics. It wants clarity. It wants direction. It wants to be someone again. It says, "This is taking too long. You're wasting your life." But the soul whispers back, "Be patient. I'm not building a life. I'm building a truth." Carl Jung believed the psyche has its own intelligence, a sacred rhythm that unfolds not on our schedule, but on the soul's clock. He said, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of its morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie." In other words, what once served you will not serve you now. The identity that got you here cannot take you further, but letting go of that identity is not an intellectual process. It's visceral, emotional, sometimes even physical. It feels like floating in a fog with no compass. But what you don't realize yet is that your compass is being rebuilt, magnetized not by fear or ambition, but by authenticity. There's a reason shamans, monks, mystics, and prophets from every spiritual lineage have all spoken of this phase. In shamanic traditions, it's the dismemberment. In Christian mysticism, it's the desert. In Buddhism, it's the great letting go. And in every story, the hero is brought to a place where their old tools no longer work, and new tools haven't yet appeared. This is initiation, but we weren't taught how to recognize it. Instead, we were taught to fix ourselves, to push through, to take supplements, set goals, hustle harder. But you can't hustle your way into wholeness. You can't trick the soul into moving faster than it needs to. In fact, the more you resist this space, the longer it lingers. That's the paradox. The more you surrender to the in-between, the more your inner world begins to reorganize. You see, the loss of motivation isn't a problem. It's a message. It's your system shutting down the old fuel source's external approval, performance, perfectionism, and preparing to power up something different. Something rooted not in image, but in essence. But essence takes time to emerge. It's like walking into a dark room after years in the sunlight. Your eyes can't see clearly. Everything feels unfamiliar. You stumble, grope, question. And just when you're about to give up, Your vision adjusts. Shapes emerge. Shadows take form. And suddenly, you realize you're not lost. You're just in the dark part of the temple. Carl Jung often spoke of symbols as the language of the soul. During this phase, when logic fails you and plans don't make sense, you may begin to dream differently. Notice recurring images: animals, water, fire, old places. These are not random. They are invitations. Messages from the unconscious saying, "I'm here. I've always been here. But you were too busy to hear me. Now you are listening." This is the symbolic life Jung spoke of, not as fantasy, but as participation in a reality deeper than facts. A reality where your feelings are guideposts, your dreams are signposts, and your energy is more honest than your thoughts. So what do you do in this space? You don't push, you don't force clarity, you court it. You slow down. You walk in nature. You journal not to fix, but to observe. You meditate not to rise above your feelings, but to befriend them. You speak less and listen more. You create without agenda. You rest without guilt, and slowly, a new current begins to move through you. Not a tidal wave, not a bolt of lightning, but a trickle, a soft hum, a quiet nudge saying, "This way." It may not make sense to others. It may not even make sense to you. But it feels right. And that feeling is the new compass. You begin to see that this in-between isn't a punishment. It's protection. It's preparation. It's sacred ground. And when people ask you, "What are you doing with your life?" you might not have an answer. That's okay. You are not a brand. You are a soul in transition. So let them rush. Let them run. Let them chase clarity while you make peace with mystery. Because on the other side of this space is not the old you, reassembled. It's a new being, born not from effort, but from essence. And when that being emerges, they won't need motivation the way you once did. They will move with something far more powerful: alignment. And it all begins here, in the forgotten space between just when you think you've surrendered enough, when you've let go of everything you thought you were supposed to be. The ego makes one final move. It doesn't roar this time. It doesn't shout or strut. No, this time, it whispers. It appeals to your fatigue, your confusion, your yearning for something familiar. It says things like, "You're wasting time," or "You used to be so driven," or worst of all, "Maybe you made all this up." This is the ego's last stand, and it is subtle. It's the voice of your past self, your programming, the identities you built to survive. These aren't evil or bad. They were necessary. They got you here. But now, they don't know what to do. Because they weren't designed for the post-awakening landscape. They were built for performance, not presence. Carl Jung warned us about this phase. He understood that after the collapse of the persona, there is often a backlash, a psychological recoil. Because as the self begins to rise, the ego feels threatened. It senses its diminishing relevance. And so, it gets creative. It might masquerade as spiritual ambition, telling you that you need to do more shadow work, read more sacred texts, meditate harder. It might try to repackage itself as a higher version of you. But the truth is, the ego doesn't know how to transform. It only knows how to adapt its mask. And that's where many seekers get stuck. They awaken. They see through the illusion. But then the ego dresses itself in spiritual robes and reasserts control. It says, Now that you're enlightened, you should act like it. Be better, be calmer, be more mystical. And just like that, you're back in the game, still seeking, still striving, but now with a halo. But the soul doesn't care about image. The soul is raw. It is messy. It doesn't need incense or mantras or approval. It just needs you to be real. In one of my earliest pilgrimages, I spent time with a Sufi mystic in the outskirts of Cairo. He told me, the last illusion is the illusion of no illusion. Beware the ego that speaks your new language. I didn't understand him at the time. But years later, after my own awakening had gutted me, when I found myself trying to perform peace instead of embodying it, his words came back. The ego doesn't leave easily, and it doesn't leave cleanly. It lingers in the shadows of your transformation, waiting for the moment you doubt yourself just enough to invite it back. This is not failure. This is the test. It is the crucible through which the authentic self is born, not as a perfected being, but as a humble presence, grounded in truth and open to growth. You see, the self is not here to dominate the ego. It is here to integrate it. Jung spoke of individuation as a process of wholeness, not purity. The goal is not to eliminate parts of yourself, but to bring them into right relationship. To stop being ruled by fear, shame, or performance, and instead, let those energies return to their rightful place as parts of a much larger whole. So when the ego rises again, don't panic, don't shame it, and don't obey it. Just notice. Breathe. Get curious. Ask it, what are you protecting me from? Because beneath every egoic impulse is a fear. Fear of not being seen. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of disappearing into the mystery. And those fears are valid. They are human, but they are not in charge anymore. Let me offer a metaphor. Imagine your awakening journey as crossing a great bridge between two worlds. On one side, the familiar city of the ego lit up, structured, buzzing with noise. On the other side, the wide-open wilderness of the soul, vast, quiet, undefined. The bridge is narrow, swaying, and long. And at the halfway point, the ego calls out, "Come back, at least there. You knew who you were." And for a moment, your steps falter, because the soul doesn't offer the same security. It doesn't promise outcomes. It doesn't hand you a roadmap. It invites you to walk by feel, not formula. And that is terrifying for a psyche raised on control. But here's what I've learned. Again and again, the further you walk across that bridge, the quieter the ego becomes. Not because it's defeated, but because it's finally being held, seen, understood. The more you listen to the deeper voice within, the less the ego needs to scream. It softens. It begins to trust the self. It relaxes its grip, and in that softening, something miraculous happens. You stop needing to perform. You stop needing to explain yourself. You start moving not from ambition, but from alignment. Not from fear, but from flow. Not to be loved, but because you already are. This is the shift from egoic motivation to soul-led movement. It's subtle, it's not flashy, but it is profound. You might notice it when you say no to something that no longer fits, even if it once defined you. You might notice it when you choose rest over productivity, intuition over logic, integrity over image. These moments may seem small, but they are seismic, because they mark the birth of a new internal authority, one that doesn't need to shout. So if the ego is still whispering, still tugging at your sleeve, don't push it away. Just smile, nod, Let it know I see you. Thank you for your service. But I'm walking a different path now. You're not abandoning the ego. You're evolving beyond its limitations. And the ego's last stand, it becomes the self's first embrace. This is not just spiritual theory. This is lived truth, and it is just the beginning. So many souls reach this moment of awakening and whisper the same quiet terror. I don't know what my purpose is anymore. It doesn't matter who you were before the CEO, the healer, the mother, the artist, the seeker. You've gone through the rupture. You've seen behind the curtain. And now, like a character who stepped off the stage, the script no longer fits. The old roles feel empty. The applause no longer feeds you. And when people say, just follow your passion, it lands like static in your ears, because you can't feel passion when your system is still in ashes. This is the myth of lost purpose. But what if I told you that you haven't lost your purpose? What if I told you it's been recalibrated? See, most of us were conditioned to think of purpose as a role, a career, a mission statement we could slap on a website, something that would make us feel valuable and visible. But Carl Jung, in his deeper writings, pointed us towards something far more mysterious, the symbolic life. A way of being that isn't about outer labels, but inner resonance. A life that doesn't follow a script, but emerges from within. So when you awaken, truly awaken, your old purpose dissolves because it was too small, too ego-bound, too performance-based. It may have looked noble, it may have helped others, but it was still built on the foundation of doing to become. Now, you're being asked to live from being to express, and that shift is seismic, because being requires no justification. There's a story from Eastern tradition that speaks to this. A monk had spent decades seeking enlightenment. He meditated in caves, fasted, traveled, studied every sacred text he could find. One day, he sat with a teacher who simply asked, "And now, who are you without all of that?" The monk began to weep, because for the first time, he realized he had mistaken his seeking for his self. We do the same with purpose. We chase it, define it, announce it, brand it. But when awakening comes, it strips us bare. Not to leave us empty, but to make room for a new truth. You are not here to play a role. You are here to be a presence. Jung called this presence the self, not the persona or the ego, but the deep, central organizing force of the psyche. And the self does not care if you're a barista or a best-selling author. It doesn't measure purpose by output. It measures it by alignment. So, how do you know if you're aligned? You begin to feel resonance. Not excitement, not adrenaline, but a quiet yes inside. You feel drawn, not pushed, moved, not managed. You start noticing synchronicities, moments that feel orchestrated by something larger. A conversation that opens a new path. A dream that lingers longer than it should. A gentle nudge to say yes to something small that leads to something bigger. Purpose is no longer about chasing. It's about listening. It's about participation. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart." Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. That awakening reorients everything. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and begin asking, "What wants to move through me?" And the answer won't come in bullet points. It will come in whispers, in symbols, in steady, small steps that rebuild your life from the inside out. But here's the paradox. This kind of purpose doesn't always look impressive. You may no longer crave the spotlight. You may find yourself tending to a garden instead of building an empire. You might leave behind grand ambitions to care for a child, write poetry, cook meals, sit in stillness, and the world may not understand. It may look at you and say, "You used to be so full of potential." But what they don't see is that you've stopped trading your essence for applause. You've stopped confusing movement with meaning, and you've begun living a different rhythm, a soul rhythm. Let me tell you something I've only shared with a few students. Years ago, after a decade of teaching and speaking around the world, I woke up one morning and realized I couldn't keep doing it. Not because it wasn't good work, not because it didn't help people, but because it wasn't coming from the same place anymore. It had become performance, and my soul said no. For nearly a year, I went quiet. I stopped teaching, stopped writing. People thought I was burned out, but I wasn't. I was rerouting. I was letting the old fire die so the true flame could emerge. And when I returned, the words were different. The work was slower, but it carried something it hadn't before: truth. Not polished, not perfect, but alive. That, I believe, is what true purpose feels like. Not certainty, but congruence. And when you start living from that place, strange things happen. You find yourself at the right place at the right time. You say things you didn't plan, but that someone desperately needed to hear. You begin to realize that you're not the source, you're the instrument. And life is playing through you. So if you're here, wondering why you feel disconnected from your goals, why your dreams feel like someone else's script, why you no longer burn with urgency, breathe. You are not broken. You are shedding the myth of lost purpose. What's coming alive in you now is not a new task list. It's a new self. A self that does not ask, "What should I do with my life?" but instead humbly asks, "What does life want to do through me today?" And in that shift from striving to surrender, you will find a kind of purpose that never needs to be chased again, because it was never lost, only waiting. There comes a point on the path where the silence stretches longer than expected, where the stillness, once sacred and welcome, begins to feel suffocating. The initial relief of breaking free from the rat race begins to sour into restlessness. You start to wonder, am I stuck? Did I make a mistake? Shouldn't I be doing something by now? This is where stillness begins to feel like failure. But let's pause and go deeper. What you're feeling is not failure. It's friction. The friction between the old world and the new world inside you. Between the identity that was built to perform and the self that only wants to be. Stillness, in truth, is not the absence of movement. It's the presence of something deeper. But if you've spent most of your life moving to feel worthy, being still can feel like worthlessness. And that's where the confusion begins. Carl Jung wrote, "Thoroughly unprepared. We take the step into the afternoon of life. Worse still, we take this step with the false presupposition that our truths and ideals will serve us as hitherto. But we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of its morning. Stillness is the afternoon. It is the phase where external momentum is replaced by internal magnetism, where doing gives way to being. But no one teaches us how to be. In a world that equates value with productivity, resting feels like quitting. Slowing down feels like falling behind. Silence feels like failure. But let me offer you another perspective. What if the stillness is not your enemy, but your medicine? What if it's not a pause in your journey, but the very terrain your soul came to explore? In alchemical terms, this is the negredo, the blackening, the dissolving phase. It is the moment when all that is false is burned away. The ego fights here. It resists the darkness. It tries to light a candle, to find clarity, to chase purpose again. But the soul waits. It waits in the dark. Not because it is lost, but because it knows the gold is buried there. Every ancient initiation had a moment of silence. The shaman in the cave, the prophet in the desert, the monk in the forest. Not one of them skipped this part. Because stillness is not a detour. It is the descent into the symbolic life, into the body, into truth, and it's disorienting. You might feel tired for no reason, disinterested in things you once loved. You might forget what day it is. You may sleep more, talk less, feel emotions that rise out of nowhere. That's not regression. That's recalibration. Your nervous system is reattuning to the frequency of yourself. The noise of the old world is being turned down so the voice within can be heard. And yet, the modern mind will try to interpret this as stagnation. You might hear the inner critic say, "Everyone else is building. Everyone else is creating. You're falling behind." But who set the clock? Who decided the pace? Who told you that the rhythm of your soul must match the speed of the algorithm? Let me tell you a story. There was once a woman in her mid-40s who had spent years in a spiritual community. She taught meditation, held retreats, helped others awaken. But one day, she couldn't get out of bed. Not from depression, but from an inner pull to stop. Everything in her life had become performance. Even peace had become a product. So she lay there for weeks, listening, feeling, not teaching, not posting, just breathing. And in that stillness, she heard something she hadn't heard in years, her soul's voice. It didn't give her a plan. It didn't give her a brand. It gave her a sentence: "You are not here to impress. You are here to inhabit." And that changed everything. Stillness, when truly honored, is not passive. It is participatory. It invites you to feel what you've been avoiding, to reclaim what you've exiled, to hear what you've silenced. It is not the absence of energy, it is the redirection of it. Carl Jung would call this the withdrawal of projections. When the soul no longer seeks meaning outside itself, but begins to recollect those pieces and bring them home. When the gods we chase in the world are finally seen as archetypes within. And that inner integration requires stillness, not as a strategy, but as a sacred space. So if you feel like nothing is happening, remember, roots grow downward before a tree rises upward. That invisible growth is real, necessary, vital. You're not failing, you're forming, and in time, the stillness will give birth to something new. Not a resumption of your old life, but a reimagining of your place within it. You may emerge with less to prove, but more to give. You may speak softer, but with more clarity. You may move slower, but with deeper intention. This is the alchemy of stillness. And you are not behind. You are on time. You are not broken. You are breaking open. You are not stuck. You are being seated more deeply into your truth. So breathe. Stay. Trust. Let stillness do its holy work. It's not the end. It's the sacred inhale before your next true exhale into the world. There is a sacred paradox at the heart of awakening, that no one truly prepares you for the more you let go, the emptier you feel. And yet, that emptiness is not a void to be feared. It is the womb of something ancient, something eternal. This is the alchemy of emptiness. In the old world, emptiness was a problem. It was something to be filled quickly, efficiently, often unconsciously, with noise, food, work, relationships, ambitions. We were taught that to be full is to be whole, that space is dangerous, that stillness must be solved. But awakening flips that equation. It doesn't give you a new strategy. It strips away the old scaffolding. It burns the blueprint. It asks you to sit in the ashes and feel the ache of nothingness, not as punishment, but as purification. Carl Jung often spoke of the unconscious as a vast, fertile ocean. And when we awaken, we don't just see the surface more clearly, we begin to feel the pull of its depths. But the ego doesn't know how to swim in those waters. It wants clarity, direction, something to do. And the soul simply says, be still. Let the waters rise. This is where the emptiness begins. You look around and realize the goals that once gave your life structure now seem hollow. The relationships that once defined you now feel distant. The dreams that once lit you up now flicker like fading stars. It's as if your inner world has been cleared of all furniture. You are standing in a vast, echoing cathedral of your own being, and you have no idea what to place in it. But here's the miracle: the cathedral was always there. The clutter was blocking it, and now that it's clear, you can finally begin to listen. Emptiness is the soul's reset button. It is the deep pause between breath and word, between life as it was and life as it will be. In alchemy, this stage is called the solutio, the dissolving. It is when the solid structures of identity begin to melt, and we are asked to surrender to a process that feels formless, directionless, sometimes even senseless. But the truth is, you are not dissolving. You are being distilled. Everything that is not essential is being washed away. And what remains, that small, glowing ember at the center of your chest, that is what's real. I once spent several weeks with a Benedictine monk who had taken a vow of silence. He told me that the hardest part of his practice was not the silence, it was the emptiness that followed. After the noise is gone, he said, the void begins to echo. And in that echo, I heard all the voices I had silenced: my fear, my grief, my shame. I had to make peace with them before I could hear God. This is the invitation of emptiness, not to avoid it, but to enter it, to sit at its feet and ask, what am I ready to feel now? And when you do, something shifts. The emptiness, once terrifying, becomes luminous. It becomes the space where grief turns into grace, where old wounds become wisdom, where sorrow ripens into song, because the soul is not in a hurry. It does not fear the void. In fact, it requires it. The great mystics knew this. Rumi wrote, "Don't run from the emptiness. It's where the divine is most alive." The Desert Fathers spoke of the kenosis, the holy emptying. In Taoist philosophy, the Tao itself is described as the empty vessel that gives birth to all things. And so, if you're feeling empty right now, if the silence inside you feels unbearable, know this: you are not in free fall. You are in sacred suspension. You are not losing your way. You are shedding everything that blocked your true direction. And in time, the emptiness will not feel like absence. It will feel like space, like breath, like possibility. Carl Jung taught that the self, our deepest, truest essence, emerges not through effort, but through integration. And integration requires space, spaciousness, room to let the pieces return in their right time, in their right shape. So don't rush to fill the void. Don't panic when the answers don't come. Instead, become a witness. Watch the thoughts rise and fall. Feel the ache and bless it. Hold the silence like a child cradling a wild, shy animal gently, patiently, without demand. Because one day soon, the emptiness will begin to speak, not in words, but in impulses, in dreams, in gentle waves of energy that say, create this, move here, say yes to that. Not because you must, but because your soul finally has the space to express its truth. And that truth will not roar, it will whisper, but its whisper will feel like coming home. So let the emptiness do its alchemy. Let it hollow you out, not to leave you barren, but to prepare you for the sacred fire that can only burn in clean space. The self is not found in fullness. It is revealed in what remains after the letting go. And from that still, quiet center, a new life will rise, not built, but born. There is a quiet revolt that begins to stir in the awakened soul, a kind of sacred rebellion, not against others, but against the artificial. You find yourself unable to fake it anymore. The smile you used to wear for approval begins to feel heavy. The conversations about things you no longer care about become unbearable. The performative, polished parts of you begin to itch, like clothes that no longer fit. Something in you says, I can't do this anymore. And at first, that voice is terrifying, because it doesn't come with a new script. It just tears up the old one. This is the rejection of the artificial, and it is one of the clearest signs that your soul is reestablishing dominion over your life. Carl Jung spoke often of the process of individuation, the journey of becoming the self. And central to that path is the stripping away of personas, the masks we wear to navigate society. Not because they're evil, but because they're incomplete. They are survival mechanisms, not soul expressions. And awakening exposes them. You begin to feel allergic to anything fake. Small talk, social games, shallow validation. You might even look around at your life, your work, your relationships, your routines and wonder, who built this? Because it wasn't the real me. That's not a breakdown. That's a breakthrough. Your system is detoxing from performance, and the symptoms can be disorienting. You may feel repelled by places or people you once loved. You might quit jobs, leave groups, cancel plans, and not because you're flaky, but because your inner compass has changed. It's no longer calibrated to fit in. It's tuned to feel true. And truth has a frequency. You can feel it in your body, a relaxation, a resonance, a subtle yes. And you can feel falseness too, a tension, a dissonance, a quiet no. The more you listen, the louder it becomes. Not in decibels, but in clarity. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is refinement. You are shedding layers of adaptation. You are no longer willing to betray yourself to belong. And that changes everything. It changes how you speak. You become more direct, not rude, real. You stop using language to manage perception and start using it to express essence. You begin to say things like, that doesn't feel right, or I'm not available for that, or I don't know yet. And that's okay. It changes how you show up. You wear what feels good, not what fits the trend. You rest when your body asks, not when the calendar allows. You stop forcing your energy into spaces that don't honor it. You become less interested in being understood and more committed to being authentic. And it changes what you create. Your work becomes an offering, not a strategy. You stop chasing metrics and start following meaning. You write, speak, build, teach not to impress, but to express. Not to be liked, but to be real. And in doing so, you may lose some of your audience, but what remains is aligned. Carl Jung would say that this is the movement from outer directed consciousness to inner alignment, when we are no longer molded by the expectations of others, but shaped by the whisper of the soul. But this transition is not easy. There is grief here, grief for the old identity, the one that worked so hard to fit in, to succeed, to be liked. Grief for the relationships that were built on masks, not essence. Grief for the version of you that did the best it could with what it knew. Honor that grief, more in that chapter. But do not mistake it for regression. You are not becoming less. You are becoming honest. And honesty, in a world built on image, is radical. You will walk into rooms and feel the dissonance. You will scroll through curated perfection and feel your stomach turn. You will hear words spoken without soul and feel your energy retreat. Not because you are cynical, but because your frequency has shifted. You are now a tuning fork for authenticity, and that changes how you move in the world. You may find yourself drawn to slower conversations, deeper connections, unfiltered presence. You may crave simplicity, silence, real laughter, eye contact, art that makes you feel something. People who have done their shadow work, spaces where your nervous system can relax. You may outgrow your own dreams, and that is not a loss. It is an upgrade, because the soul doesn't dream in metrics. It dreams in meaning. It doesn't crave attention. It longs for connection. It doesn't want to go viral. It wants to go deep. So if you find yourself recoiling from the artificial, take heart. This is not a phase. It is not a mood. It is your nervous system adapting to truth. You are not broken. You are aligning. You are not isolating. You are individuating. You are not difficult. You are discerning. And the more you honor that truth, the more the world around you begins to shift. You attract different conversations, deeper mirrors, more aligned invitations. And the paradox is, the more real you become, the more resonance you generate. Not because you're trying, but because you've stopped trying. You've let go of the script, and now, your soul is writing something new. Word by word, breath by breath, real, unfiltered. True, there comes a moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when something begins to stir inside the silence, after the stillness, after the collapse, after the shedding of masks and the grieving of illusions. A quiet ember begins to glow again. It is not the old fire. It is not ambition, urgency, or the hunger to prove. It is softer, deeper, older. It does not burn, it radiates. It does not shout, it hums. This is the resurrection of inner fire. You don't feel it like a lightning strike. You feel it like a return. Like remembering something you never truly forgot. It moves gently at first, whispering through your being. There's something here. There's something now, and unlike your past drives, this new energy doesn't push, it pulls. It pulls you toward resonance, toward simplicity, toward soul. It may call you to speak when you've been silent, to create when you thought you were done, to move forward not because you must, but because your whole being says yes. Carl Jung called this the emergence of the self, the central organizing force within the psyche that integrates, heals, and guides. It is not a role or a title. It is an alignment. It is what rises after the ego has been decentered, and the persona has been seen for what it is, a costume, not the actor. This inner fire comes not from the surface, but from the center, and it often returns after the darkest night. You see, spiritual awakening is not a one-time event. It is a cyclical unfolding, like the moon, like the tide, like breath. And after the exhale of letting go, after the long pause of emptiness, comes the inhale of embodiment. Not as a return to what was, but as the emergence of what truly is. You begin to feel desire again, not craving, not attachment, but sacred desire. The desire to live, to contribute, to create, to serve, not because it validates you, but because it expresses you. You move not to escape your pain, but to translate your truth, and that movement feels different. It doesn't come from your mind, it comes from your bones. You may wake up with an idea that won't let you go. You may feel your hands reaching for old instruments, old brushes, old journals, not out of nostalgia, but out of necessity. Because something wants to come through you. Not for applause, not for success, but for wholeness. This is how the soul moves. It doesn't care about metrics. It cares about meaning. It doesn't chase timelines. It honors timing. It doesn't demand perfection. It invites presence. You are not returning to your old motivation. You are discovering your true momentum. I remember sitting in silence with a woman who had spent years in the void, no drive, no clarity, no passion. And then one day, without warning, she started to paint again. Not for a gallery, not for a career, just because her hands could not paint anymore. She told me, I don't even know what I'm painting. I just know that something inside me is being translated. That is the inner fire, not forced, not performed, but awakened. And it does not move in straight lines. It spirals, it dances, it drips like honey. It arrives in waves. And your job is not to control it, it is to trust it. Carl Jung believed that wholeness is not achieved by addition, but by integration. And integration takes time, it takes space, it takes silence. That is why the fire doesn't come all at once. It comes as readiness allows. It returns when the soil of your soul has been cleared of old roots, when the ground has been made soft by surrender. So if you feel something stirring something new, fragile, precious, tend to it. Protect it, nurture it, let it flicker. It may not look like purpose. It may not come with a business plan. It may be as simple as writing a single paragraph, walking a different trail, or reaching out to someone who's been on your heart. Do it, not because it will change the world, but because it's the next true thing. This is how the new life begins, not with fanfare, but with faith. The resurrection of inner fire is not a dramatic return. It is a quiet remembering, a subtle heat in the chest, a voice inside that says, I'm not done. And when you follow it, not with force, but with devotion, you begin to re-enter life. Not as a persona, not as a performance, but as a participant. And your presence becomes the offering. You begin to give, not what the world demands, but what your soul carries. You begin to live not from effort, but from essence. And the flame inside you, it begins to glow again. Steady, true, yours. By now, you've walked through the void. You've tasted silence so deep, it echoed back your forgotten self. You've seen the masks fall, the artificial dissolve, and the inner flame flicker back to life. And now, something curious begins to happen. You feel the pull to re-engage, to return to the world you once left behind, but not as the person who left it. You are returning through a different door. This door doesn't lead back to your old life. It leads deeper into your new one. The circumstances may look similar, same job, same relationships, same town, but everything feels different. Why? Because you are different. Carl Jung believed that true transformation didn't remove us from the world, it changed how we participated in it. The self doesn't need isolation to thrive. It needs authenticity. And now that the dust has settled and the fire inside you glows steady, You're ready to re-enter, not to perform, but to embody. And this return is tender. You might find yourself speaking less, but saying more. Showing up with fewer answers, but deeper presence. You move differently, not out of compulsion, but choice. You no longer run on the adrenaline of ambition or the anxiety of approval. You move from alignment. This is the quiet power of integration. In ancient myths, the hero doesn't stay in the underworld. They return wiser, humbled, changed. But they return with gifts, insight, clarity, medicine. You, too, have gathered treasures in the dark. And now, the world you once escaped from is the very place where you'll pour those treasures out. Not everyone will notice the change. Some will expect you to be who you were, to act the same, think the same, play the same roles. And it might feel tempting to shrink again to fit back into the mold that used to earn you love. But you can't. The mold no longer fits. You've expanded, and in that expansion, you might lose certain connections. That's not a tragedy. That's a clearing. As your frequency shifts, so does your resonance. The people who remain are those who meet you here, not just who remember you there. Let me share a story. A man once told me about his awakening. He was a therapist, deeply trained, deeply respected, deeply disconnected. After a near-death experience, he withdrew for over a year, reading, healing, weeping, walking in the woods. When he returned to his practice, he no longer followed the script. He listened differently. He held space in silence, and his clients began to transform in ways they never had before. Not because he gained new techniques, but because he returned as a different presence. This is your invitation now, to return not with answers, but with essence, to speak not to impress, but to connect, to live not to perform, but to embody. And the beautiful twist, the very world you once feared would reject the real you, begins to open. New doors appear. New connections emerge. New opportunities unfold, not because you chased them, but because you became the version of you that naturally draws them in. Jung called this symbolic living. He believed that life begins to mirror our inner transformation, that when we align with the self, synchronicities multiply, not as magic tricks, but as mirrors, reflections of our resonance. So when you begin to see signs, don't dismiss them. That feather on your path, that stranger who says exactly what you needed to hear, that door that opens with no explanation, and these are not coincidences. These are soul winks, evidence that the new energy you carry is rippling outward. And with each step, your life becomes less about control and more about participation. You don't need to architect every detail. You need only to show up, fully, in the next honest moment. To keep saying yes to what feels aligned. To keep saying no to what contracts your spirit. To trust that your presence is enough. This is not the triumphant return of the conquering hero. This is the sacred return of the integrated soul. No crown, no fanfare, just presence. And it's more powerful than you think. Because a person who has walked through fire and returned with gentleness in their eyes carries a kind of gravity the world cannot manufacture. People feel it. Children trust it. Animals relax in it. The earth responds to it. You become a tuning fork for truth, and your presence becomes permission. Permission for others to drop the act, to feel their pain, to reclaim their voice, to believe in something deeper. You don't have to teach them. You simply have to be you truly, unapologetically, and gently. And in your return, you become a portal, a bridge between the seen and unseen, the world and the soul, the outer life and the inner fire. You've returned. through a different door, and nothing will ever be quite the same again. You made it, not to the top of some mountain, not to the final destination, but to the sacred threshold, the point where you are no longer just awakening, but embodying. You are no longer seeking the self. You are living as the self, and that changes everything. Living as the self doesn't mean you feel perfect. It doesn't mean you're never triggered, never confused, never tired. It means you move through all of those human experiences with a different posture. A posture of presence, a groundedness that doesn't vanish when life gets loud, a knowing that hums beneath the chaos. Carl Jung called this individuation the process by which a person becomes whole, unique, and fully themselves. It's not about transcendence. It's about integration. You're not here to float above your humanity. You're here to incarnate divinity within it. And when you live from the self, life doesn't become easier. It becomes deeper. You stop reacting. You start responding. You stop chasing validation. You start listening to inner resonance. Your relationships shift. Your work transforms. Even the way you sit with yourself changes. Because now, you don't run from your shadows, you greet them. You don't numb your feelings, you decode them. You don't fear the unknown, you dance with it. There is no formula here. No one-size-fits-all path. Living as the self is wildly unique. For some, it means raising children with radical presence. For others, it means building businesses rooted in truth. For others still, it means tending gardens, composing music, or simply walking through the world as a calm, steady presence. But the common thread is this alignment, not performance, not pressure. Alignment. Your yes becomes cleaner. Your no becomes clearer. Your choices stop leaking energy. You no longer barter your essence for belonging. You no longer betray your body for acceptance. You no longer apologize for your boundaries, your needs, your clarity. This is what maturity of soul looks like. It is not loud. It is not flashy. It is not flawless. It is radiant in its groundedness. It is magnetic in its stillness. It is wise. Not because it knows everything, but because it knows what matters. And perhaps the most miraculous part of living as the self is what begins to ripple outward. Without trying, you become a lighthouse. People are drawn not to your image, but to your energy. Not to your credentials, but to your coherence. Not to your performance, but to your presence. You begin to inspire simply by existing, and you become safe not because you agree with everyone, but because you've made peace within yourself. You no longer need to fix, convert, convince, or impress. You hold space. You speak truth. You move gently and powerfully at the same time, and this doesn't mean you always feel certain. The self isn't a rigid identity. It's a living process. There will be days of fog, moments of contraction, echoes of the old patterns. But now, you meet those with compassion. You've developed the inner muscle of return. Return to breath, return to presence, return to the deep, sacred center within you that no longer flinches when the world shakes. This is what all the silence was for. This is why you walked through the fire, not to become special, to become real. And the most honest thing I can tell you now is this: the journey doesn't end here. It never ends. Living as the self is not a final destination, it's a daily devotion, a lifelong unfolding, a choice, again and again, to return to what is true. So keep listening, keep softening, keep aligning, keep choosing what is honest over what is easy, what is sacred over what is safe, what is real over what is routine. You are not here to perform awakening. You are here to live it, to embody soul in every gesture, to express truth in every breath, to carry the light of awareness into a world that is still asleep, and not by preaching, not by shouting, not by pushing, but by walking quietly, consistently, courageously, as yourself, fully, freely. Finally, welcome home.